Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some absolutely fascinating archaeological research from Dr. Jeffrey Hudon, and we're exploring the gritty reality behind one of history's most famous rivalries, the clash between the ancient Israelites and the Philistines. We're going to see exactly how this intense geopolitical friction directly led to the rise of Israel's very first monarch, King Saul. So let's dive right into the material culture, the ancient texts, and the stunning excavations that really bring this whole era to life.
Okay, let's start by asking a question that might just challenge everything you thought you knew about these famous adversaries. When you hear the word Philistine, you probably think of someone uncultured or uncouth, right? That's how we use the word today. But what if the archaeological evidence flips that script entirely? What if the true uncultured hillbillies of the ancient Middle East were actually the Israelites?
Dr. Hudon's findings reveal a pretty massive, stark disparity. The Philistines were actually highly advanced, cultured coastal elites who held a strict monopoly on iron technology. Meanwhile, the Israelites, they were a rustic, loosely confederated people living in simple four-room houses up in the hill country, entirely reliant on outdated bronze tools. We're talking about a clash of two completely different worlds here.
Section 1. Meet the Philistines, the Sea Peoples. So who were they? Well, around 1200 BC, at the tail end of the Late Bronze Age, these sea peoples arrived from the Aegean and invaded the coastal cities of Canaan. And they didn't just scatter. They established 5 major, highly organized epicenters known as the Pentapolis: Ekron, Gath, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. They organized these cities a lot like a Greek polis and were ruled by lords, using the ancient Aegean term sophron. But they didn't stay put on the coast. They needed land to grow crops, so they began pushing eastward. Excavations at sites like Ekron reveal this massive, aggressive expansion. In fact, by the 7th century, Ekron became one of the largest olive oil producers in the entire Middle East. And naturally, this aggressive push for resources meant an inevitable, violent clash with the Israelite tribes nearby. Their cultural sophistication is just undeniably proven by their material culture, specifically their pottery. This wasn't just functional clay. It was literal art. It evolved in clear stages, starting from an Aegean-style monochrome tied directly to their Mycenaean roots, then moving into a bichrome phase and finally maturing into beautifully finished late decorated wares. The manufacture and the finish were totally distinctive from anything the local Canaanites or Israelites were making. Section 2. High Society versus Hillbillies. Now, the tension between these groups wasn't just about geography. The crucial point here is technological supremacy. The Philistines brought highly advanced metallurgy with them and established an absolute monopoly on iron. This is a total game changer. They're outfitting their armies with iron spears, iron swords, iron armor. And the Israelites? They're stuck using far inferior bronze. In ancient warfare, that is a devastating disadvantage. To really wrap your head around this tech gap, think about the everyday Israelite farmer. Historical texts mention that if an Israelite actually managed to get his hands on an iron plow, he couldn't even maintain it himself. He literally had to travel down from the hills and pay a rival Philistine blacksmith just to get his farming equipment sharpened. The Israelites simply did not possess the technology. Crazy, right? When you look at all this evidence, Dr. Hudon notes the Philistines were kind of the ancient cultural equivalent of Paris or New York during the period of the Judges. Imagine being an Israelite living in a rustic, unadorned hill country village. You look down toward the coast at night and see the glittering lights of Ekron or Gath. You see their fantastic temples, their advanced architecture, the bustling nightlife. It was incredibly intimidating, but also a deeply alluring high society culture right on their doorstep. Section 3. Warning: Kings come with costs. This intense disparity pushed the Israelites to a breaking point. After suffering devastating defeats at the hands of the ironclad Philistines, including the tragic destruction of Shiloh and losing the Ark of the Covenant, they were teetering on the edge of collapse. Out of desperation, they approached their leader Samuel and demanded a king to fight their battles. But Samuel delivered a chilling warning about the harsh realities of an ancient monarchy. Samuel really didn't mince words here. He basically told them, a king isn't just a military leader. He is a taker. He warned that a king would draft their sons to run in front of his chariots and make weapons of war. He'd take their daughters to serve as perfumers, cooks, and bakers in the royal court. Let's break down the actual price tag of this proposed kingship. They'd have to give up the absolute best of their fields, vineyards, and olive groves. They'd face heavy taxation, a tenth of all their grain and flocks.
Ultimately, Samuel warned they would sacrifice their very freedom and become his slaves. And when they finally cried out for relief, the Lord would not answer. Yet, the Israelites flatly refused to listen. They demanded a king anyway, simply to be like the other nations and have someone to fight for them.
Section 4. Enter King Saul.
Well, the Israelites got exactly what they asked for, their very first monarch. Saul fit the ancient ideal of a king perfectly. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, and by all outward appearances, he looked the part. He's described as handsome, exceptionally tall, and a mighty warrior. And to secure his new kingdom, he established his capital at a site called Gibeah, just a bit north of Jerusalem. Archaeological work has actually shed some light on Saul's center of power at Gibeah, also known as Tel El-Ful. Now, the archaeological layering here is notoriously complicated. This is partly due to older excavation methods, but also because modern constructions, like King Hussein's unfinished palace, were built literally right on top of the ancient site. Still, despite those challenges, excavators successfully uncovered the corner of what is widely believed to be Saul's fortress tower.
Section 5. The truth about Goliath.
It was during King Saul's reign that one of the most legendary encounters in human history occurred. We've all heard the story of David versus the Philistine giant, but ask yourself, when you look at the historical and linguistic data, was the giant Goliath actually an ethnic Philistine from across the sea? Dr. Hudon points out that based on his name and background, Goliath was actually not an ethnic Aegean Philistine at all. The evidence heavily suggests he was a local mercenary fighting for the Philistine city of Gath. His ancestors were likely living in Gath long before the Sea Peoples ever arrived. In fact, he was most likely descended from the giant Canaanite peoples mentioned in Genesis and other ancient texts, like the Nephilim or the Anakim. I mean, that completely changes how we visualize that battle, doesn't it? But even if Goliath himself wasn't Aegean, the style of warfare absolutely was. The whole concept of two champions stepping out from their respective armies to fight man-to-man to decide a battle, that was a distinctly Aegean military tradition. The Philistines brought this specific type of champion versus champion combat to the region, perfectly setting the stage for that dramatic showdown in the Elah Valley. Section 6. The Fall of King Saul. You'd think David's victory over Goliath would have been a unifying triumph. Instead, despite his early might, Saul's reign quickly unraveled into dark jealousy and tragedy. Saul became entirely consumed by paranoia over David's rising popularity. He wasted vital resources hunting David down, forcing him to hide in the wilderness and even serve as a mercenary for the Philistine king Achish. This intense internal division left Israel incredibly vulnerable. Ultimately, Saul met his tragic end at Mount Gilboa. His army was utterly defeated by the Philistines. His son Jonathan was killed, and Saul, facing imminent capture, took his own life. It was an absolutely devastating loss for the young nation. Which brings us to a profound final thought to leave you with today. The Israelites looked at the glittering, advanced, iron-wielding culture of the Philistines, and they felt inadequate. They willingly traded away their personal liberties, their best lands, and their own children to install a king just to gain national security. But looking at the tragic, bloody end to Saul on Mount Gilboa, was that sacrifice of freedom actually worth the price? Thank you for joining me on this explainer. I hope this deep dive into the archaeology of the Israelite monarchy has sparked your curiosity to go learn even more.